Thank you for coming to the Sierra Club Outings Equity in the Outdoors Open Discussion Series. I think this is our 6th one. And so just a few recaps of kind of what Sarah just said, just if you're a visual person. We've got mute in the lower corner. Just make sure that you're on mute unless you want to speak. You can also stop your video also in that lower left-hand corner if you don't want to be seen. And the chat button is in the middle, as Sarah has pointed out. We start all of our discussions with some community agreements. This one is going to be a little bit different because we're not going to have the breakout rooms and the kind of more of the discussion, but we will have like a question and answer at the end. So, but just limit any jargon, acronyms, or industry language that you might know so that we can all understand what we're talking about. We're going to use one mic, so we're going to just stay muted unless you are called on to speak, and introduce yourself before you speak so everyone knows who's speaking. And also, as Sarah mentioned, use this chat box to stack so that we know that you want to come off your mic and talk. Always speak from your own experience. It's okay to be raggedy. Sometimes these conversations are hard, and some of us, as we were just talking about, have had limited sleep. So if things come off not as you meant it, just know that that's okay. But we also use the ouch, oops, if you hurt somebody or if you say something that causes somebody pain, apologize for that, but know that can happen in these conversations. So in just a little recap, this is our 6th meeting, I think. In February, we talked about connecting people to the outdoors. In March, we talked about who feels safe in the outdoors and why. In April, we talked about the thoughts about identity and inclusion and how it affects a safe, welcoming outdoor experience for all. And in May, we talked about ways to break down accessibility barriers. In June, we talked about gender, but we don't have any cards for that. But that's what we talked about in June. And then we had a conversation with Jackie. I wasn't part of that one. Was it Sarah?
Yeah, Jackie from the Outdoors for All campaign.
Yeah.
And just quick flag, I'll butt back out again. Any of our other recordings can be found on our YouTube page, and I'll share a link out to that if you wanted to check out any of the previous discussions that we've had.
Awesome. Thank you for the reminder. All right, so jumping into today, we're going to have a conversation with Joanne Douglas. She's an environmental artist and educator in Philadelphia and the Watershed Interpretation Manager at Bartram's Garden. She's also a co-founding member of Encouraging Development in a Green Economy and is a BA in Political Science from the University of Pennsylvania and is currently working on your master's in environmental studies? No.
Done.
You are finished. Awesome. Well done. All right. So, Joanne, is there anything else you want to share about yourself before we jump in?
No, I think that pretty much covered it. I have started working with a game design art collective called Cosmologem. And we've been doing a lot of really cool stuff around games and environmental education. That has been exciting.
Awesome. So we wanted to have a conversation about being Black in the outdoors and kind of the misconceptions, the representation, and the and how Sierra Club can do better in serving and helping to support and serve populations that we are not part of. So I'll start with a few questions that I had. A lot of the discussion about racial inequality in the outdoors centers around the idea that Black and brown people don't have the knowledge or skills to participate in outdoor recreation, whether it's hiking or camping or fishing or whatever, swimming. Can we talk a little bit about how this misrepresentation and how actually that's incorrect, and there's a long history of culture in the outdoors?
Yeah, so I think for me, that's one of the most important misconceptions to kind of do away with. And it's understanding that, you know, African Americans specifically, and those in the African diaspora, come from very rich from very rich cultures that participate in activities around nature. It may not be done in the same way. It may not be defined as, you know, recreation, but a lot of it is. Some of it is just like how folks have sustained themselves over time. So Black people are not strangers to the outdoors, and don't need to be necessarily brought into experiencing those things in a way that I think has been done very often by larger white environmental groups. For example, at Bartram's Garden, we have a large population of anglers that come out and fish regularly. That wasn't necessarily because someone, you know, and a white environmentalist was like, you can fish, and here, let me teach you how to fish. There's a deep history of, you know, African Americans coming up from the South, and from the South through the transatlantic slave trade coming from West Africa, where fishing and commerce and that type of commerce is very, you know, people are very active in that. The landscape is not that much different. You know, there are people that live on the shoreline. There are canoe villages, and so boating and fishing are practices that happen in those cultures. And so they didn't lose them when they came over or were, you know, brought over, and it has carried through, you know, maybe not in the ways that you would think through like written history, but through oral history, through practice. And it shows up at Bartram's, where there are many, many people that come out to fish. Also, you know, Black people in nature are not as visible in ways that white people in nature may be. So while it may look like Black people are not participating in natural spaces, they're just maybe hidden or secluded or being done in ways out of the sight of the general public. So it doesn't mean that it's not happening. It's just happening in ways that are not as out there and advertised.
Why do you think that this misconception or misrepresentation has like come about?
You know, that's a tough one to answer. I think it could be several things. One is, you know, because of systemic racism and segregation, Black and white people have had to, like, in this country, have a history of experiencing things in different spaces. And so there would be no reason that you would see that happening all the time, or it would be visible. Also for survival, you know, for Black people to have their own culture or their own spaces where it's not always under the white gaze. It's not gonna be in the white gaze, right? So you're gonna have your cookout in a park where there's not gonna be a lot of white people there or looking around. You're going to fish in places where there might be tree cover, or you're going to hike. You know, Black people were cut off from a lot of national parks for a really long time. You were charged to go. They're in areas you can't necessarily get to without a car. You know, and there's like legacy of wealth there that will cause an issue for someone not to get there. So I think that, you know, hiking happens, walks happen. It might not be called hiking, but you go on a long walk. My father has an entire farm in his backyard but he doesn't call himself an urban gardener or a horticulturalist. He's just like, yeah, I just grow a lot of stuff. Like I'm a farm boy from Mississippi, and I now have a farm in Detroit, like in my backyard. So yeah, I think that, you know, when you are answering a question and then you go off and you're like, wait, what was I answering?
No, you're good.
Answering for you. Yeah. But it's just that there's a deep history in this country where Black people have had to keep and protect what they do for recreation and fun, and as a means of safety. Because I mean, we saw it with what happened with Central Park. That's just one example. When Black people do start going into quote unquote white spaces to do some of these activities that they may have been doing all along, then there's this perceived threat. So why even bother with that? If I'm trying to have joy and do something in nature, I'm not going to go to a place where I could potentially be putting myself in harm's way or be, you know, perceived doing something differently than I actually am.
Yeah. Do you think that there's like any sort of like catch-22 element to it where there's a lack of like visibility? So then people are discouraged from participating. There's been a lot of like Black Birders Week, Black hiking, so like to highlight people who are Black and who do these activities. Is there, on the flip side of that, if you don't see it, is it deter people from participating, do you think? Or is that just
I think that now that could be happening. So for example, I grew up with my father. And he's like, he is the first generation to leave the South and come up to Detroit, right? So I grew up with someone who was farming regularly or touching the soil constantly, and we were eating from the land. Like my stepmother we would go to these huge markets and get like tons of veggies. And like, even my mother, like she grew up in Brooklyn, but she knew the value of like going to a park or like, you know, getting out of the city space. We would do girl camping trips, that kind of thing. I think that now, like my generation, we have some of that from our parents, but those a little bit younger than us in like high school or college, they kind of need to see that representation in order to continue it, because it's not in the home as much as it was when I was younger. So I do think right now it is important to have like Black surfers, Black birders, Black hikers, where people can be in community with those that look like them and go out and in safety and numbers, like go out and then experience these activities.
Yeah, I think that all of those weeks that have come up that have been really cool to see, people getting really excited for that representation. Go ahead.
I also was going to say like the, you know, there's a difference between, there's like representation, but also like a continuation of culture versus like someone coming in and saying, we're going to teach you how to fish. We're going to teach you how to boat. Here's how you interact with nature. And someone who looks like me saying, here's how our culture interacts with nature. Here's how our culture has historically like used water, been with water spiritually or otherwise. And we're going to continue those practices. So I think with the representation comes also it being defined by that culture, like what is happening in those spaces, and not just a continuation of, you know, like keeping the cycle going of like, this is how you do this.
Yeah, one thing that we've been talking about as Sierra Club, which is historically a very white organization, is that like there's different ways that different people in different cultures experience nature and participate outside and all this stuff. And the like policing of how different people participate in outdoor recreation is something like I know that I had to break myself from. I like to go out to the woods and I like it to be quiet and I like to be alone. And other people like to go out into the woods and like listen to music and, you know, it's just different. So what kind of, I guess like when we're talking about, you know, participating in recreational activities like that, what kind of policing do white people do? I mean, I think that you've kind of touched on it a little bit, but
Yeah.
anything on that?
I can talk a little bit about like individual policing, but then also institutional ways that I see that there are barriers to, you know, making space for people to just be in nature however they wish. I think on the individual level, you know, I think there's this like culture of stewardship, like this is my park and I have to take care of it. And so anything you perceive as not taking care of it is a threat and you want to do something about it, right? And so I think the way that plays out with a lot of white people is it's, oh, there's someone coming in and making noise or doing a thing, and now I have to stop that, not necessarily because I dislike that person or that, you know, I want to harm that person, but because I'm trying to protect this place. And I think keeping in mind that not all cultures have this belief of owning and ownership of a space. And so, and don't act in that way, and that's okay. Also, there was one time there was like in a park where like there was a couple arguing, and like I could see if someone wanted to like call because like there's a couple arguing, or you want to be like, hey, that's not the place for this. I'm trying to have my quiet time. But like we're better to argue than in a public park where there's like trees and nature and you guys can like get it all out and then relax, you know? So just I think having on the individual level, understanding that like the way that you perceive nature, the way that you interact with nature is not how everyone else does. And it's not your place to manage that. Like you just do what you do. Like you make sure that you don't throw the wrapper on the, or like the plastic wrap on the floor, or like you're quiet, or what, however you define it, or however you connect with nature, do that and let other people figure it out for themselves. Institutionally, I think a lot of our park infrastructure plays into that. And I saw that one of your talks was on that. So, but I think that's really important. So like signage, you know, signs that say do not or no, like as Black people, that's all you hear. So, you know, conversations in your signage will go way further than like a no, stop, do this, do that. Like trying to create this like ideal park subject to go a certain path in a certain way. Like why would the world does that? So why would I go into a natural space where I'm trying to like connect and have peace to be confronted with that? I will also say, you know, a lot of the signs are only in English. Making sure that if your park, looking at like the cultural makeup of people around your park and making sure that there's no language barriers there, that, you know, people are able to understand what's happening, or that there's a sign about history that it's also in other languages. And you know, call boxes, like some things are perceived safety, like certain types of lights or call boxes for police, those kinds of things, but can actually be really harmful for Black and brown bodies. And there's an example of, they were in Philadelphia, they wanted to start something called the mosquito. And I don't know how far this has gone, but it was like a noise that was emitted and only people 23 and younger could hear it in the parks after like 10 p.m. And it's like, okay, you want youth to like respect parks, but then you're like kind of violently keeping them out of them. So I think, you know, paying attention to the infrastructure around wherever you live or wherever you work, that is a natural space, and making sure to speak up about it is probably the best thing you could do, instead of attacking an individual or trying to protect by calling in, you know, government, which, you know, we've seen does not always end well.
Yeah. Okay, we already talked about that. So we, in Pennsylvania, we live in a very white rural state, where most of the state is white rural, and that's where a lot of the state parks are and the state forests are. And it's also was voted very heavily for Trump. And I bring that up just because he was a white supremacist. And how do we have our state parks feel safe for folks who want to use them, who have to like travel to those places? Is this a perceived problem that we've that we're thinking that this is a problem for folks to feel safe in our state parks and forests, or is there some truth to that? Do you have any thoughts about traveling outside of the cities to experience the outdoors and the safety or welcomingness of that?
Yeah, I mean, so I can't speak for like every Black person and who lives in an urban environment as to why they don't like move out, go out into the national state parks. But I think even beyond party lines, like yes, there are predominantly white spaces, but are the state parks welcoming to people? Are they going to be paying more attention to Black and brown bodies that are in those spaces than others? And that could be whoever's president. It's just like, who is running the parks? What are they paying attention to? I mean, the history of our parks was to get rid of Indigenous people, stop their practices on the land. So I can't speak for someone who is Indigenous, but I can't imagine going to a state park to enjoy, and having that kind of like generational trauma come up is enjoyable. But for Black people specifically, I'm not convinced that they're not doing that. But I do think, from my experience, I can say even going to the shore can be uncomfortable because there's a lot of, there's more of an outward display or show of people's beliefs now, as far as like what Trump was like aligned to, or like Blue Lives Matter. If I see those kinds of flags and things around, I'm more likely to like drive another mile up on the shore until I don't see as much and then go in, or stop into a store. And if there's like a friendly young person, be like, oh, okay, maybe the young people don't feel like that here. I'm gonna go hang out at the beach. So I can speak from personal experience to say that, like, yes, that is sometimes a deterrent for me. But I can't speak for everyone and say that that is. There's lots of other layers and reasons to why people are not going out to state parks, or we're just not seeing that. I mean, including, Philadelphia income has not caught up to its housing, and like, who has the gas to like jump in a car and drive that many miles away to the nearest state park? There's a lot of people in the Wissahickon and at Bartram's and, experiencing, and Cobb's Creek, experiencing the parks that are close to them and more accessible and easier to get to.
Yeah, there's a lot of like that like systemic stuff that has just like deterred people from going for various reasons. Mm-hmm. One thing that we were thinking about was the like stereotype of swimming and how, mm-hmm. Being not having access to pools. Can you explain it or speak a little bit about that history and how that has shown itself to today?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have like all the facts and numbers, so I won't bore you with that. You're lucky. But I will say that, like, yes, there has been, discrimination and segregation around who can use public pools. Our waterways have been contaminated, so a lot of people do not swim in them. They're not safe to, some of them are not safe to swim in. There are some small swimming holes that people still use to this day to stay out of the public eye, but those are getting more and more policed. So I think it's like various reasons why Black folks specifically in urban environments have been cut off from swimming. Now, and there actually is like a really good, there's an exhibit coming up, or it might even be there at Fairmount, called Pool. And it actually goes into detail of that history, specifically in Philadelphia, with like photography and some facts to help, lay out that story better than I ever could right now. And then, places like where I work at Bartram, we're working to try and figure out a way to make sure that the community that is most immediate to us knows where resources are to get free swimming lessons, or access to like water comfortability workshops, that kind of thing. So there are resources out there for folks to get comfortable with swimming, but there has been, I think it's just a legacy of the history of this country, unfortunately, and that that Black people have just been cut off from water for a long time. I know there's like, I've heard it a couple times where people are like, oh, like Black people and water, and because of like fear and slavery. And I'm like, I don't necessarily believe that. I don't necessarily believe that it's coming from a place of fear. I think a lot of it is just access. There is not the access to the pools and the lessons and the natural places to swim where there used to be, and I think a lot of our older generation, they can swim. It's not, especially those that came from more rural areas. So it's not, I don't think it's like Black people are monolith where it's like, that has been the case constantly.
Do you think that kind of history of segregation has influenced other areas of like outdoor recreation as well? Like I imagine that might influence people who feel comfortable boating. Anyway, what do you
yeah, I mean, boating, like who has access to a boat, especially if it's not, just like, where are you going to get a boat from if it's not there, and then once it's there, you have access to use it and get comfortable with the water. A lot of people think, and this is one thing that would come up a lot at Bartram's, is people thought the river was private. And that's mostly because there's a ton of industry along the river. So if I'm seeing industry along the river, there's no safe access points. Do I think that that's a place that's inviting and is going to, that I can like jump on with a boat if I had a boat? No, I don't. So I think that's one major thing. Where else does it show up? Yeah, I mean, even with like paying to go to certain parks or paying for campgrounds, or and then just like no access to funding to do that kind of thing, that shows up because that was a way to segregate before. And if we look at our waterways now, like some of the really safe access points are in more affluent areas. Before I started working at Bartram's, really what it was, a Walnut Dock, and then that's even very recent. And then before that, it was like above the dam, where it was you had to go to a wealthy crew regatta in order to like be near the water, or down on the Delaware where there's marinas. So there's not a lot of really like access points to even begin to do some of the things that like some of the things you may want to do on water, like get on a boat or even fishing safely.
So Sierra Club outings, we are aiming to have inclusive, diverse trips into the outdoors. What are some ways that we can help, well, not be part of the the problem, if there is a problem, and to help support organizations or groups that don't have the same access that we have had because of our white privilege. What are some ways that we can help without coming in and just sweeping up kids and taking them to the forest? Like,
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's a few that I'm thinking of. Okay, so I think being involved on like the city level of park infrastructure, right? So it's like, is there a place where a dog could go in and go in safely? Start lobbying for that. Start advocating for things like that. Do you have funds and want to donate so that there can be more equipment? And by equipment, I mean whatever equipment people want, right? So like, we have a large Southeast Asian population down at Bartram's. There are other ways to fish than using a pole. Like, is there other equipment that people might need to do that? Making sure things like the mosquito don't go in, for example. Making sure that costs are kept low for certain types of parks, and advocate, giving, and again, with the funds, like giving funds to groups that are already doing that work. There's a group called Yeah Philly, and they work with adjudicated youth, and they take youth on nature excursions, but it's done by people who are from that community, who connect with those students already. Like, so there are groups out there that are working with youth, like, and you could just donate to them without trying to, reinvent the wheel or just like set up shop and do it yourself. But I think the biggest thing is Sierra Club has a big name, and it has a lot of power behind that name, and using that power to throw around like some of that weight politically to like make sure these spaces are as inclusive as possible, I think is where most of the good work can happen. Like, as simple as, oh, there's a sign at our park, our chapter can now push for that sign to be more inclusive. Maybe it needs more visual cues. Maybe it needs more language. Maybe we do like figure out who's in the area and who needs to read it. Maybe there's a different way for us to say do not, and we can change that. I feel like there's definitely ways to create more inclusive and equitable outdoor spaces without, going to pick up a bunch of youth and then taking them fishing and then dropping them back off.
Yeah, Sierra Club does so much advocacy for the environment, and I think that the outings section of it, we haven't really talked about what kind of advocacy that we could be doing to help be more inclusive in parks like that. Those are some really, really good suggestions.
You can also partner, like no one's against partnerships, right? So it's like making sure that like if you are going to take youth on a camping trip, it's not organized by Sierra Club, but Sierra Club is more in a support role.
Yeah.
And you get to go with them and have a great time and like share your knowledge, but not in a way that's like, come children, let me show you how to, like,
Yeah. I think that's when we're so used to being I'm an outings leader, I'm the leader.
Mm-hmm.
That's like what I always consider my role. So yeah, taking a step back and being the support person for other organizations. There's a lot of organizations in Philly. I'm sure that there's a lot of organizations around the state also that are doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Those are kind of all of my prepared questions that I had for you. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you feel important that you want to speak about?
Not that I can think of. We kind of covered a lot. Those were like, they were heavy. Like,
well, Well, I would love to open it up to folks who have questions. I think that there might be some in the chat, and if people either want to, let me see.
Meredith, we do have 2 questions in the chat already. I can go ahead and read them out. So that way everyone can hear. Some folks are on the phone this evening. And then if anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to either put them in the chat or write stat or raise your hands so that you can come off mute and ask them yourself. So with that being said, our first question was from Jesse, and they were wondering, they wrote in the chat, I have a 10-acre farm and it's a priority for the farm to create a safe space for everyone. The immediate surrounding neighborhood is generally affluent and white and might not be perceived that way, even if it is. Any suggestions on some concrete action steps to pursue to begin to engender that safe environment?
Ooh, that's a lot of work for you. I think, so do you mean like when you say engender that safe environment, are you meaning like how to like make your space more inclusive within this like maybe not as welcoming place? Or like how can you be the
well, at the beginning of the conversation, we were talking about like how there's some separate spaces where people might not feel, and I want from a real place. I come from wanting all kinds of people to come here and enjoy the space. So we grow food for the pantries of Montgomery County, but we also open up the farm to partner organizations and kind of put it at their disposal as a platform and say, how can you use the farm? And that includes just also, you know, individuals, residents, people in the area. That's a long-term process that I'd like to engage in, and have that knowledge out there that this is a safe space for whoever, you know. That's a good idea. Translating our sign into Spanish. We serve, I think 60% of our clientele is Hispanic. So we're trying to grow food for the Hispanic population, like cilantro, peppers, chilies, onions, all kinds of stuff that and listen to them. But generally, yeah, the surrounding area is white, and I don't know. You know, I think partnering with organizations and doing the support role is a good thing. But do you have any other possible suggestions? Like long term, like if it was like a 5-year plan and I'm going to kind of, you know, create a safe space plan and get that awareness of that vibe out there, what would that look like, you know?
So I think sometimes we do work a little bit too hard to have buy-in from the community that might be like surrounding you. You don't need their permission. Like just like keep doing what you're doing. And then I also think like, I know it may seem like people won't want to come into that space, or it may be like, oh, the neighborhood around it doesn't feel good. But I would let your partner organizations decide, or individuals decide for themselves, would they want to come into your like farm space. I think there is a lot of advocacy work that you can do as far as like, you know, setting up like the police and Black and brown bodies is very tricky. So I'm not really sure how you want to work that out should like a neighbor call the cops on someone coming to visit your space. But I think those are things to like think through. What does that conflict like resolution look like for you? You know, when someone from the community who's not as happy about someone else coming into it, like what does that look like when they meet? I think continuing to like the signage is really great. The growing foods that are asked, you know, for by the people that are coming in, like growing foods for people, like cultural signifiers. Those kinds of things are really amazing, and work really well. And yeah, just keep reaching out, because I know that it may feel like people don't want to come because of who's around you. That's not necessarily the case. So just keep making those partnerships.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Thanks.
especially with farmers, because there's so many people looking for land to farm, and then they can bring the programming and the people in, and you've provided the land. Like if you sectioned off some or something like that.
Okay. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
The next question that we have in the chat seems a little bit more open than the last one, but it's from Robin, and they state, the point about representative staffing at parks seems important. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for Sierra Club to partner in pressing the state on diversifying park staffing. Is that something that could be pushed as part of Growing Greener or other legislative packages?
I don't know if that's a question for me. I think that might be for, whoever's in charge.
I can try to take a wing at it. So yes, definitely. The more broad answer to that. Sierra Club in general has a pretty good working relationship with DCNR, and on the state level, but on the local level, you can develop your own relationships with any of the county or municipal parks that are in your area to have a discussion with them, because they might not have the same hiring practices. They might not think about equitable hiring when they're looking at their roles, or they might just be looking at resumes and not who's working and living in the communities that they're in. So you can definitely lobby and be an advocate for a diverse hiring pool for not just DCNR parks, but also your local and municipal parks as well. And it could definitely be something that's pushed for as part of Growing Greener. So we can talk about this later, Robin, if you'd like. You have my email. Let's start a chat. We don't have any other questions in the chat right now. Oh, Amy just popped something up. But before I get to you, Amy, there was a question that was asked via email before the call, or there was an individual who couldn't make it and had a question for you. So Daniel asked, and pardon me if I butcher the pronunciation. I'm used to Lenape being a standalone word. So Lenapehoking, I believe, is that correct? So there's an art project that's going on within the city, the Lenapehoking Watershed Art Project. And they had questions around what your thoughts on rebranding the watershed in honor of the Lenape people might look like, and if that could be considered a positive change of course.
Yeah, this question, I mean, my answer is gonna be kind of a cop-out. Like, I don't think it's for me to say whether or not it should be rebranded in this way. I think it is good for us to, like, we should be acknowledging the history of the land and the water. But that's a question for someone from that particular nation to answer. I just do not know what feelings they have around, like, is this an initiative started by the Lenape people to rebrand or rename or reclaim, or is it because like, is this a way that we think that we're healing something, or is it to feel like I don't know enough about the whole
The
process behind that to say.
question asker actually is on tonight, and he asked if you could come off mute.
Oh, yeah.
So,
totally.
yeah, Dan, by all means, pop off mute.
Hi, I am,
Hi.
I'm not, I haven't been on these meetings before, and I'm really super glad that you're here talking to us tonight. And I'm really interested. I mean, I'm generally interested in your work at Bartram's Garden because I go there a lot, and that really caught my eye. You know, thank you to the folks organizing this for bringing you in. I mean, generally, I'm also interested in what what you are doing at Bartram's Garden. If it's appropriate for you to talk about that, that would be great. But there's an art project that is at Bartram's Garden and a bunch of other places around the city. And I've had a few conversations with folks who have seen it, who because it's called Lenapehoking Watershed. And it sort of suggests that a little bit more of involvement from Lenape folks, which I think when you dig into it isn't actually there. It was just it ended up being the name of the art project that's all over the watershed. And I think that the artists were intending to kind of do a land acknowledgement and also take some stabs at a sorry if this question is a little bit messy because it's unsettled for me. Take some stabs at a rebranding, and that was what my question was getting at, and I think you answered that, which is that there's a lot there, and that's actually not what we're here necessarily to talk about, the rebranding of the watershed. But I was interested if you had any thoughts on that project, and the relationship. It had. I think this conversation tonight has been very much around the relationship between Black folks and white folks in these spaces that we're talking about. And so if you have anything to say about that, it's less about what you're up to at Bartram's Garden. I think that's one thing that I've taken from really appreciating this conversation tonight. So if there's anything that you have to say about what you've been up to at Bartram's Garden, and if you have any thoughts on that art project and its relevance to what we're talking about tonight, that would be really great as well.
Yeah, so I know there's like the card game that's coming out. And then I know that in the beginning, it didn't have a lot, like they have since had some consultation from Indigenous groups about the actual, I know like one of the aspects of that art project. I will say that I think it's really important to talk about the whole history of the watershed. And so I'm very much for like, like we have to name it the place for what it is, and talk about the history of why it is called what it is now. That is something that comes up with any education, any group that I bring in for watershed education. We have that discussion. We talk about like what it looks like, how it changed, and what it looks like now, and where we would love to see it going in the future. And that's all a part of it. One of the things is that a lot of those lessons haven't been put out in the world the way that I would want to, because we do want to make sure that we are consulting the people that we're talking about, right? So we have, like, my colleague Chloe Wong is in conversation constantly with Indigenous peoples around water, especially in the area. And Bartram has a relationship with like there's an Indigenous group that we have Indigenous Peoples Day and like, and activities in our arts and cultures department. So I think, well, I would like to say like, this is it, we did it, we're rebranding it. I think it's it's a conversation that has only really started recently and is playing out in all of these ways. And I think people are realizing that it's such an issue that so much history has been cut out of like when we talk about the watershed, that they're like, oh my goodness, I need to put this in and this in and this in. But I think it's going to take a while for us to get it right. Right. Like, I think it's going to take a while for all voices to be heard and for the work to like make sense and feel good in the way that it should. But that project shows me like we're like on a path there, which is encouraging. And at Bartram, so I specifically work with, I started the Daintree River Guardians program, which is a high school river program. And it's a sister program of our farm high school internship at Sankofa Community Farm. Both of them have Adinkra symbols as their names, which are ancient Ghanaian. It's an ancient Ghanaian way of form of communication. Daintree is a crocodile, and it is, the symbol means adaptability and cleverness and versatility, which we've just witnessed with this storm that just came, how adaptable we can actually be. So aptly named. But yeah, we just recently we partnered with the farm to have a workshop for the students that was looking at freshwater food systems. And one thing I do at Bartram is we look at our watershed, but we look at our cultural watershed. So we know that we have members of the Southeast Asian community, Cambodian, Vietnamese, and we also have many people from the African diaspora, so West African, African American, and the whole lesson was around freshwater food systems, how those cultures in their lands of origin, like where they came from, origin, how they sustain themselves off of freshwater food systems. And then we were able to come together. We talked about catfish and the significance of catfish in the African American community, and we cooked catfish together with one of our wonderful chef educators, Chef Dobson, and we made a stir-fry rice, and we just like ate that together and experienced that together. So it's like any chance we get to, like, even if we're not getting it absolutely right, to tell a larger story, a bigger story than what has been told, and go deeper in history. We also talked about, like, I read a lot from the book. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a recently passed chief. I'm so sorry, but I will find out who it is. And he talked about mussels. There were a lot of anecdotes in the story, and one was about mussels and remembering when he went back to look for the mussels and they were gone. So it tells a story about pollution in New Jersey. So yeah, I think just like as communities open up and share their stories, incorporating that into these larger art projects, incorporating that into the education that we are giving is important, and we'll figure it out.
I do want to acknowledge that it is just around 8 o'clock. So if folks need to bounce off, thank you for coming and enjoy the rest of your evening. But for those of you who want to stick around a little bit longer, Joanne, do you have a little more time for Q&A?
Yeah, I can stay a little longer.
Okay, so anyone who would like to stay a little bit longer, you're more than welcome to hang around. But for anyone that needs to leave, like I said, thank you for joining us, and we'll be sharing out a copy of the recording to everyone who registered. So look for that in the next couple of days. Yeah, all right. We did have a question from Amy, and she was asking, where is it? There we go. If you have any stories to share about people successfully working through and building safe outdoor experiences with adults from divergent experiences.
Can you define divergent experiences for me, please? Thank you.
Amy, do you mind coming up?
Sorry, I just like one of the challenges that I keep running into, not so much in my own experience, because for whatever reason, I feel like I do an okay job of blundering through and managing to build a relationship no matter what. But I run into a lot of conversations with other white people who want to overcome the boundaries, not the boundaries, the schisms, the firewalls, the cultural differences, like all of it. And I never know what to say. I mean, I would think that you've had to plow through a lot of relationship building, and I'm just wondering, maybe not so much necessarily your own firsthand experiences, but like, do you have any inspirational stories, like anything to share in terms of like just watching people figure out how to get along better with each other and build safer spaces, and especially for like not forcing, but like, sorry, it's raggedy at this point, right? It's after 8, I can be messy. I was on an hour-long phone call today with a very well-meaning white person from like the middle of the state, the middle of Pennsylvania, super rural, all white, heavy Republican, red Trump country. And I didn't even know, like at a certain point, I just like didn't know what to say anymore to this guy, because like I don't know why it's so hard to understand that people are coming from really different places sometimes. Is there like do you have like an elevator speech or no?
Oh gosh, that's tough. I mean, so like our river program that, you know, Danielle, and Danielle Redden, who is the director of the river programs at Bartram's Garden, has put together like 100 or so volunteers and this amazing like public boating program. And, you know, Amy has volunteered there. And I would say even just being there on Saturdays and watching just people from all over come and boat together has been, I think, inspirational to me. I can just say, like, I don't know where people are coming from. I don't know their backgrounds. I don't know their political affiliations, but they're just all out there trying to enjoy themselves and get some respite from like whatever on a weekend day, you know?
So if we can just get people out there, miracles can happen.
Okay, so this is the other thing I was gonna say. There's a lot of work underneath that happens to make that space what it is, right? Like our volunteers go through trainings, and they go through trainings with a group called Aorta on race, you know, racism, on classism, on sexism, on, you know, gendering, on all of that. Our volunteers are very, very much trained on how to be respectful to people from the public that they may not know. My high school students also go through that training, but they also have like, I'm very clear about how people talk to them and like how they are not talked to, and how they are supposed to be respected in a space. They have, you know, they're in charge of the rowboats. They have their own job. I work very hard to build their confidence. And I think all that work underneath. Also just like with our access, like we have safe access, we have kayaking where, you know, many different bodies can get in and out of boats. We have different types of boats for many different bodies. I think so. There's a lot of work underneath, and this didn't happen overnight. So there's a lot of work underneath to build the foundation, which is why I'm like infrastructure in parks, signage, you know, I think he got off with the person with the farm, like, yes, keep doing that work underneath, because then when you get everybody in the space, that's when it like the fireworks happen, or that's when like it feels.
So when you're like trying to get people to understand how, like what language is appropriate and what language is not, I understand who you're advocating for. Who are you speaking to? Is this like members of the public who like show up to do public voting? Or, because one of the questions we regularly get is, what do you do when someone shows up to your hike and they're a jerk? And sure, we say, well, you need to not let them go on your hike, but that's not as like, that's not
yeah.
easy,
I mean, I was an elementary school teacher for a really long time, right? And in my science class, if I had a student that was throwing stuff or having a fit, instead of being like, James, why aren't you blah, 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 I would go, hey, Ashley, you know, I really like how you're doing a really great job writing those things, you know? And then James, because he just wanted that attention, would be like, oh my goodness, okay, I'm gonna write a thing. And then maybe she'll like pay attention to me. I honestly think working at a pre-K, working at an elementary school was like the best thing I could have done for my entire life, because people are just seeking it. A lot of people just really are seeking attention or validation. You know, a lot of people are left out of a lot of things for whatever reason. And it could have nothing to do with the signage or nothing to do with politics, but they're going to bring that, right? And then politics and like language is like a really easy way for them to be frustrated and be a jerk. So I'm not saying to ignore, but like, that's not who you're focused on. You are focusing on who you advocate for. You are focusing on the people who are on the hike, trying to have an amazing experience. You're not focused on trying to change the mind of the person who is acting out. And yeah, I just don't waste that energy anymore. It's too much.
Do you still have to do a lot of wrangling like that at Bartram's at this point, or do you feel like all the culture building you've been doing there, or has it always been kind of a cool?
No, it has not always been at all. I mean, you know, we'll get like a volunteer or two, or like, you know, someone from the public, but I think because of our training, we're really good at knowing this is a public space. So you are allowed to be here with your whole messy self, you know? And, but that also doesn't mean that I have to like focus on your messy self. I can go focus on other things. And if you want to participate, then you have to like get it together. So I can't say that we really have a lot of that type of conflicts, or at least it's not outward, because we've done so much foundational work on making sure that like when you come down to the boathouse and you're there and you're experiencing it, you already know that it's not for you to do that. Like I've had students yell at my students and be like, I know how to boat. And I'm like, hey, listen, you know, they're training and they just have to go through this speech. Our boats are built differently. Can they just give you the speech? And they're like, oh, okay. You know, because they don't want direction from like a young Black girl or something. We get a lot of ego down there at the boathouse, and we're like, okay, like, our rowboats are really difficult. Like, good luck. But
I can imagine. I mean, I haven't ever personally like when I've been at the boathouse, I've never experienced that. But gosh,
students do.
Doing Sierra Club outings, like being relatively young female by Sierra Club standards, and just being like a female identified person, the amount of pushback that, because outdoors is a white man's space. I mean, there are people who still really believe that that the public lands and the public holdings are primarily for white men's recreational pursuits. And it's like amazing to still encounter that, because I thought we'd come further.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I can't do anything about that person, but what I can do is instill such confidence in like my young people that I work with, that when they go out there and someone's like, you're supposed to, they're like, actually, no, but thank you. You know, and they, you know, continue on their way. So like, we tried really hard to get them all boating, you know, the older students, if they can finish the test, boating license, so that they just like are equipped to feel like, no, I belong. This is like, I'm allowed to do these things. You don't have ownership over this space. And then they quiet, you know, they quiet down. I don't think we're gonna get rid of those people. I don't think that's gonna happen, but you can come with the same energy.
Yeah.
I'm gonna jump in for just a second. We do have a few folks left on the call. I'm gonna stop recording. So this can be like open, raggedy space. I'm not gonna close the Zoom call. So if anybody wants to stay on, you don't have to stay on, Joanne, but anybody who wants to stay on and come off mute and talk, the recording is stopping now. Yes, that's my last piece of that. So recording stopped.